The Korath warship was still 30 minutes away. That gave them time to think, but not much time to act. Ambassador Veshan gathered everyone in the command center and explained the situation. The Korath were fierce warriors who respected only strength. If they saw a damaged diplomatic vessel with no military escort, they would see an opportunity. The peace negotiations were probably a trap from the beginning. Danny asked about the ship's defenses. The Valoran officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The Starweave was a diplomatic transport, not a warship. It had light shields and a few defensive weapons, but nothing that could stand against a Korath cruiser. In a direct fight, they would be destroyed in minutes. Kira pulled up data on the approaching vessel. It was a medium-class attack ship with heavy armor and powerful weapons. The crew numbered around 50, all trained soldiers. If they boarded the Starweave, resistance would be hopeless. The Korath would take Ambassador Veshan hostage and use him as leverage against the Confederation. Lyra asked what would happen to everyone else. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he admitted that the Korath had no reason to keep witnesses alive. The crew might be enslaved or killed. His daughters would be valuable hostages as well. Fear spread through the room like a cold wind. The Valoran crew looked at each other with despair. They had survived the engine failure only to face a worse fate. Some began to weep quietly. Others stood frozen with shock. Danny watched all of this and felt something stir inside him. He was not afraid, exactly. Fear was there, but it was pushed aside by something stronger. These people had welcomed him onto their ship. They had trusted him to save them. Kira and Lyra had worked beside him for hours, treating him like a friend despite everything their culture taught them about humans. He could not let them be captured or killed. He would not. He asked to speak with the ambassador privately. They stepped into a side corridor while the twins watched with worried eyes. Danny spoke quickly and directly. He had an idea, but it was risky. It might not work. And even if it worked, someone would have to take a very dangerous chance. The ambassador listened without interrupting. When Danny finished explaining, the older alien was silent for a long moment. Then he asked who would take this dangerous chance. Danny said he would do it himself. Ambassador Veshan shook his head. He said Danny had already done more than enough. It was not right to ask a stranger to sacrifice himself for people he had just met. Danny replied that they were not strangers anymore. Not to him. They returned to the command center, and Danny explained his plan to everyone. The Starweave could not fight the Korath ship directly, but they had other options. The communication array was powerful and flexible. If they modified it correctly, they could broadcast signals that mimicked human military vessels. The Korath knew that humans were dangerous in battle. If they thought reinforcements were coming, they might hesitate. Kira immediately understood. She said they could create false sensor signatures to support the deception. Valoran technology was good at generating precise energy patterns. They could make it look like multiple human warships were approaching from different directions. Lyra added another idea. They could use fragments of actual human military transmissions to make the fake signals more convincing. Danny had communication logs from Horizon Post stored in his shuttle's computer. They could sample those and broadcast them on military frequencies. The plan came together quickly. Everyone had a role. The Valoran engineers worked on boosting the communication array's power. Kira programmed the false sensor signatures. Lyra helped Danny extract and modify the transmission samples. Ambassador Veshan coordinated everything from the command center. They had 20 minutes before the Praestis Korath ship arrived. During a brief pause in the work, Danny found himself standing beside Kira at a monitoring station. She was checking energy readings with intense concentration. He noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. She was scared, even though she was hiding it well. Danny told her that she was doing great work. Kira looked up with surprise in her silver eyes. She said she did not feel like she was doing anything useful. She was just following instructions and hoping for the best. Danny shook his head. He told her that she was doing exactly what needed to be done, and she was doing it under pressure. That took courage. Most people fell apart when things got dangerous. Kira was holding herself together and helping others do the same. That mattered more than she realized. Kira was quiet for a moment. Then she admitted that she was terrified. She had never faced real danger before. Her whole life had been safe and protected. She did not know if she was brave or just too scared to run away. Danny smiled and said those were often the same thing. Real bravery was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to act despite being afraid. By that measure, Kira was one of the bravest people he had ever met. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Then she turned back to her work, but her hands were steadier now. On the other side of the room, Lyra was having a different experience. She had always been the bold twin, the one who spoke first and acted quickly. But this situation was beyond anything she had imagined. She kept thinking about what would happen if they failed. She thought about her father being dragged away in chains. She thought about herself and Kira at the mercy of Karth soldiers. She approached Danny and asked him something she had been wondering since they met. She asked why he was not afraid. He seemed calm and focused while everyone else was falling apart. How did he do it? Danny paused his work and considered the question. He admitted that he was afraid. Anyone who said they were not afraid in a situation like this was either lying or crazy. But he had learned something important during his years as a mechanic. Fear was useful when it sharpened your mind. Fear was dangerous when it paralyzed your body. The trick was to let fear wake you up without letting it shut you down. Lyra asked how he had learned this. Danny told her about a time when he was young, working on his first starship. A reactor had started to overload while he was inside the engineering section. He had 2 minutes to fix the problem or die. Fear had hit him like a wave. But then he had remembered his training. He had focused on the next step, then the next, then the next. He had fixed the reactor with seconds to spare. Since then, Danny had faced many dangerous moments. Each one taught him the same lesson. Stay calm. Focus on what you can control. Take things one step at a time. It did not always work perfectly. Sometimes he made mistakes, but it worked often enough to keep him alive. Lyra listened to every word. When he finished, she nodded slowly. She said she understood now. Danny was not fearless. He was just experienced at handling fear. That was something she could learn to do as well. She returned to her station with new determination in her eyes. The Karth ship was 5 minutes away. The false signals were ready. The deception was about to begin. Danny looked around the command center at the people who had become his unlikely allies. Valoran crew members stood at their posts with nervous courage. Ambassador Veshin watched the approaching enemy with dignity despite his fear. Kira and Lyra waited beside Danny, ready to face whatever came next. For better or worse, they were in this together. Ambassador Veshin stood at the helm of the Starweave, watching the Karth warship retreat into the darkness. Relief washed through him, but it was immediately replaced by a different kind of urgency. His daughters burst into the command center with desperation on their faces. Lyra spoke first. She demanded they turn the ship around. Danny was still out there in his damaged shuttle. They could not leave him to die. Kira stood beside her sister with the same fierce determination. They had never asked their father for anything like this before. They had always been obedient daughters who followed rules and respected authority. But something had changed in them during the past 12 hours. Danny had changed them. The ambassador looked at his daughters and saw something new in their eyes. He saw courage. He saw compassion. He saw the kind of strength that came from caring about someone other than yourself. These were qualities he had always hoped they would develop. He had never imagined a human mechanic would be the one to teach them. He gave the order to turn the ship around. The Starweave raced back toward the battle zone. Sensors swept the debris field for any sign of Danny's shuttle. Long minutes passed with no results. Lyra paced the bridge with growing panic. Kira worked the sensor controls with desperate intensity. The crew watched in silence, holding their breath. Then Kira found it. A faint energy signature drifting among the asteroids. It was Danny's shuttle, badly damaged but still intact. Life signs were weak but present. He was alive. Lyra grabbed the helm controls herself and guided the Starweave toward the signal. She had never piloted a ship before, but she refused to let anyone else do it. This was personal. Ambassador Veshin started to object, then stopped himself. Some things were more important than protocol. They reached the shuttle and extended the docking bridge. Kira and Lyra ran through the airlock together. They found Danny slumped in his pilot's chair, bleeding from wounds on his head and chest. His breathing was shallow. His skin was pale. But when Lyra touched his hand, his eyes fluttered open for just a moment. He tried to smile. He whispered something they could not hear. Then he lost consciousness again. They carried him back to the Starweave with gentle hands. The ship's medical officer met them in the corridor and immediately began treating his injuries. The damage was serious but not fatal. Human bodies were surprisingly resilient. With proper care, he would recover. The twins refused to leave his side. They sat in the medical bay while the doctor worked, watching every procedure with anxious eyes. Ambassador Veshan found them there hours later, still keeping vigil. He did not ask them to leave. He simply sat down beside them and waited. The Starweave completed its journey to the peace negotiations. Ambassador Veshan conducted his diplomatic duties while his daughters remained with Danny. The talks were tense and difficult. The Korath denied any involvement in the attack, claiming the warship had acted without authorization. No one believed this, but open accusations would have destroyed any chance for progress. In the end, a fragile agreement was reached. It was not peace, exactly, but it was a pause in hostilities. It was a chance for both sides to step back from the edge of war. Ambassador Veshin accepted the terms with weary satisfaction. He had done his duty, but his thoughts kept drifting to the human mechanic who had made it all possible. 3 days after the rescue, Danny finally woke up properly. He opened his eyes and found himself in an unfamiliar room with soft lighting and curved walls. For a moment, he had no idea where he was. Then he turned his head and saw the twins sleeping in chairs beside his bed. Lyra was curled up with her head resting on her arms. Kira had a medical pad in her lap, showing his vital signs. They looked exhausted and worried and beautiful in the pale light. Danny watched them for a long moment, feeling emotions he could not quite name. Lyra stirred first. Her eyes opened and met his, and her whole face transformed with joy. She grabbed Kira's arm and shook her awake. Together, they leaned over Danny's bed with tears streaming down their cheeks. Danny tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice came out as a croak. Kira quickly gave him water. He drank slowly, feeling strength return with each sip. Finally, he managed to ask where he was and what had happened. The twins told him everything. They told him about the rescue and the negotiations and the fragile peace agreement. They told him about their father's gratitude and the respect he had earned from the entire Valoran crew. They told him he was a hero. Danny shook his head and said he was not a hero. He was just a mechanic who got lucky. Real heroes were people who saved the day without getting blown up in the process. Lyra laughed through her tears. She said Danny was wrong. Heroes were people who risked everything for others without expecting anything in return. By that definition, he was the biggest hero she had ever known. They talked for hours. Danny learned that his bravery had changed how many Velerans viewed humans. The story of the mechanic who fixed the ship and then sacrificed himself to save strangers was spreading through their communication networks. Ambassador Veshin had already received messages from high-ranking officials asking about this remarkable human. More importantly, Danny learned about the proposal. Ambassador Veshan had spoken with the leaders of the Veleran Confederation. They wanted to establish deeper connections with humanity. They wanted someone who understood both cultures to serve as a bridge between them. They wanted Danny. The offer was astonishing. Danny would become the first human cultural liaison to the Veleran Confederation. He would live among their people, help resolve misunderstandings, and build the foundation for lasting friendship between their civilizations. It was an opportunity beyond anything he had ever imagined, but there was something else. Something the twins had requested themselves. Kira explained it carefully. Among the Veleran people, there was an ancient tradition called the soul debt. When someone saved your life, you were bound to them until the debt was repaid. The twins owed Danny such a debt, and it could never truly be repaid. But there was another option, a different kind of bond that transformed obligation into something deeper. Lyra continued where her sister paused. The saved could choose to bond with their savior as family, not through marriage or romance, but through a commitment of the heart. They could become siblings in spirit, tied together by choice rather than blood. Danny listened with growing amazement. He asked if they were serious. Kira said they had never been more serious about anything. Lyra added that Danny had given them more than their lives. He had shown them what courage and kindness looked like. He had taught them that strangers could become family. They wanted to honor that lesson in the deepest way their culture allowed. The question hung in the air between them. Danny thought about his life before this moment. He thought about the lonely years on frontier stations, fixing machines and sending money home to Molly. He thought about how he had always felt like a spare part himself, useful but never essential. He thought about the connection he had found with these two remarkable young women during the most terrifying hours of his life. He reached out and took both their hands. He told them he would be honored to be their brother. 1 year later, Danny stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city of the Veleran homeworld. Towers of crystal and light stretched toward a purple sky. Ships moved through the air like graceful birds. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. Kira and Lyra joined him on the balcony, one on each side. They had changed since that desperate day on the Starweave. Lyra had become a spokesperson for human-Veleran relations, using her boldness to cut through bureaucratic obstacles. Kira had become a researcher, studying ways to combine human and Veleran technology. Both of them called Danny their brother in public and in private, and both of them meant it. A reporter had asked Danny recently how a simple mechanic had become an ambassador between civilizations. Danny had smiled and given a simple answer. He said he fixed a ship. The rest was a surprise. The Korath warship dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately began scanning the Starweave. It was an ugly vessel, all angles and armor plating, built for intimidation as much as combat. Weapons ports glowed with ready energy. The ship moved like a predator circling wounded prey. A transmission came through. The Korath commander appeared on the main screen. He was massive, with rough gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. His voice was deep and harsh, like stones grinding together. He demanded that Ambassador Veshin surrender immediately. If he did not comply within 5 minutes, the Korath would board the ship by force and take what they wanted. Ambassador Veshin replied with calm dignity. He said the Veleran Confederation would not bow to threats. The Korath were violating diplomatic protocols and risking war. The commander laughed, a terrible sound that echoed through the speakers. He said the Confederation was weak. They talked while the Korath acted. This sector would soon belong to the Empire, and soft diplomats would learn their place. Danny activated the first phase of their deception. False signals began broadcasting on human military frequencies. The transmissions were fragments of real communications, carefully edited to sound like tactical chatter between warships. Phrases like "target acquired" and "weapons hot" and "moving to intercept" filled the airwaves. The Korath commander paused. His 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion. He barked an order to his crew, and they began scanning for other vessels. Kira triggered the false sensor signatures at the perfect moment. Suddenly, the Korath sensors showed 3 human warships approaching from different directions. The signatures were imperfect, but they were convincing enough to create doubt. The commander snarled with frustration. He demanded to know if the humans were really nearby. His officers argued among themselves. Some said the signals were fake. Others said the risk was too great. Humans were known for violent unpredictability. Their ships were crude but dangerous. A single human destroyer had once destroyed an entire Korath patrol squadron. The stories were legendary among their people. Danny watched the confusion on the enemy bridge and felt hope rising in his chest. The deception was working. The Korath were hesitating. Every minute they delayed was another minute for the Starweave to build distance. But then something went wrong. One of the Korath officers ran a deeper analysis on the false signals. He discovered irregularities in the transmission patterns. The signals were repeating in ways that real military communications would not. He reported his findings to the commander. The commander's expression shifted from doubt to rage. He realized he had been tricked. He ordered his weapons crews to prepare for attack. The diplomatic games were over. He would destroy the Starweave, and everyone on board. Danny made a decision in that moment. It was not a careful decision based on logic and planning. It was the kind of decision that came from somewhere deeper, from instinct and desperation and love for people he barely knew. He told Kira and Lyra to take over the engine repairs. The improvised harmony crystal was holding, but it needed constant monitoring. If they could squeeze more power from the engines, the Starweave might be able to outrun the Korath ship. Danny would buy them time. Lyra asked how he planned to do that. Danny did not answer directly. He just told him to trust him and keep the engines running. He ran through the corridors toward the shuttle bay. Ambassador Veshin tried to stop him, asking what he was doing. Danny explained quickly. The Korath were focused on the Starweave. If Danny took his shuttle and flew toward them, he could draw their attention. He could make them think he was a scout for the human warships. He could force them to chase him instead of attacking the diplomatic vessel. The ambassador protested that this was suicide. Danny's shuttle had no weapons and minimal shields. One shot from the Korath ship would destroy him. Danny knew this. He accepted it. He told the ambassador to take care of his daughters. They were remarkable young women who deserved a chance to grow up and see the galaxy. Danny was just a mechanic. He had fixed things his whole life. Now he had a chance to fix something that really mattered. Before the ambassador could argue further, Danny was gone. Kira and Lyra learned what was happening from the command center communications. They heard Danny requesting launch clearance. They heard his shuttle powering up. They heard him say goodbye to the bridge crew in his calm, steady voice. Lyra screamed his name and ran toward the shuttle bay. Kira followed, her heart pounding with terror. They arrived just as Danny's shuttle lifted off and shot through the force field into open space. Through the shuttle bay window, they watched the tiny vessel accelerate toward the Korath warship. It looked impossibly small against the massive enemy craft. It looked like a candle flame challenging a hurricane. The Korath commander saw the shuttle and hesitated. A single pilot attacking a warship was insane. Unless it was not an attack. Unless it was a distraction. unless human reinforcements really were nearby, and this shuttle was leading them to the target. Doubt and anger warred on the commander's face. He ordered his ship to pursue the shuttle. If this human wanted to die, the Korath would grant his wish. Then they would finish the diplomatic vessel. The warship turned and accelerated after Danny's shuttle. Weapons fire erupted across the void. Danny's shuttle twisted and spun, evading the first barrage through desperate maneuvers. He was a good pilot, trained on cargo ships that sometimes flew through asteroid fields. But his skills could only delay the inevitable dot in the engine room of the Starweave. Kira forced herself to focus on her work. She adjusted power flows and monitored crystal frequencies with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop working. Danny had asked her to keep the engines running. She would not fail him. Lyra stood at a weapons console, firing the Starweave's weak defensive systems at the Korath ship. Her shots did little damage, but they added to the confusion. They made the enemy think twice about ignoring the diplomatic vessel. On the shuttle, Danny felt his craft shudder as a glancing hit scorched his hull. Warning alarms screamed. Life support flickered. He pushed the throttle harder and dove toward a nearby asteroid field. If he could reach the rocks, he might be able to hide. He might be able to survive. A direct hit struck his engine section. The shuttle spun out of control. Danny fought with the controls, trying to stabilize. Another hit tore through his cockpit. Pain exploded through his body. The stars outside his window began to blur. His last thought before losing consciousness was of the twins. He hoped they would make it. He hoped they would live long lives full of wonder and joy. He hoped they would remember the strange human who fixed their ship. Back on the Starweave, Kira completed her work. The engine surged with new power. The ship leaped forward at maximum speed, pulling away from the battle zone. Lyra watched the sensors and saw Danny's shuttle drifting dead in space. She saw the Korath ship considering whether to finish him off or pursue the fleeing Starweave. She saw the moment they made their choice. The Korath turned back toward the diplomatic vessel, but they were too late. The Starweave was already beyond effective weapons range. The chase would take hours they could not afford. Other human ships might really be coming. The risk was too great. The Korath commander howled with rage and ordered a retreat. They would report this humiliation to their superiors. They would return with more ships. But for now, they were leaving. Lyra collapsed against the console with a relief that lasted only a moment. Then she remembered Danny, drifting alone in the darkness. She grabbed her sister's arm and told her they had to go back. Kira nodded without hesitation. They ran to the command center together. The distress signal came through at 3 in the morning, station time. Danny Cole was halfway through his dinner when the alarm pulled him out of his chair. He had been working double shifts all week, fixing broken pipes and faulty air filters on Horizon Post. The Frontier station was old and always falling apart. But Danny never complained. He liked fixing things. It made him feel useful. He ran to the command center and found Captain Laura Webb staring at a holographic display. A ship was drifting about 2 hours away. Its engines were dark, and its life support was failing. The vessel belonged to the Velaran Confederation, an alien civilization that humanity had only met 5 years ago. Relations were polite but distant. The Velarans thought humans were primitive. Humans thought the Velarans were arrogant. Neither side tried very hard to change these opinions. Captain Webb turned to Danny and said the Velaran engineers could not fix their own ship. The damage was too severe. They needed someone who could improvise with limited resources. Danny was the best mechanic on the station. He had once repaired a reactor using parts from a coffee machine. If anyone could help, it was him. Danny did not hesitate. He grabbed his toolkit and headed for the shuttle bay. Some of the other crew members asked why he was risking his life for aliens who looked down on humans. Danny just shrugged and said they needed help. That was enough reason for him. The shuttle ride was quiet. Danny spent the time reading whatever files they had on Velaran technology. Their ships ran on crystal matrices instead of traditional circuits. The crystals stored energy and processed information at the same time. It was elegant and advanced. It was also completely different from anything Danny had worked on before. He would have to learn fast. The Velaran ship came into view after 90 minutes. It was called the Starweave, and it was beautiful, even in its damaged state. The hull was smooth and pale, like polished bone. Delicate patterns covered its surface, glowing faintly with inner light. But the glow was weak now. The ship was dying. Danny docked his shuttle and stepped through the airlock. The air inside smelled strange, like flowers mixed with metal. A tall figure waited for him in the corridor. The alien had silver-blue skin and eyes that shimmered like liquid mercury. His robes were white and formal. This was Ambassador Vishan, and he studied Danny with a mixture of hope and doubt. The ambassador thanked Danny for coming. His voice was soft and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He explained that his ship was carrying him to peace negotiations with another alien faction called the Korath. The talks were important. War had been threatening for years. But now the ship was broken, and they were running out of air. Danny asked to see the engine room. The ambassador led him through winding corridors filled with pale light. Everything looked fragile and perfect, like walking through a sculpture. Danny felt clumsy and out of place with his heavy boots and worn jumpsuit. But he pushed the feeling aside. He had a job to do. The engine room was a disaster. Crystal panels were cracked and dark. Strange fluids leaked from broken conduits. Velaran engineers moved around the space with graceful despair. They had tried everything they knew, but their knowledge was too specialized. They could maintain perfect systems. They did not know how to rebuild broken ones. Danny knelt beside the main engine core and examined the damage. It was worse than he expected. Several critical components were completely destroyed. The power distribution network was scrambled. Worst of all, the life support system was drawing from emergency reserves. He asked how much time they had. One of the Velaran engineers said 12 hours, maybe less. 12 hours to fix technology he barely understood. Danny took a deep breath and started working. He was pulling apart a damaged panel when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw two young Velaran females watching him from the doorway. They looked almost identical, with the same silver-blue skin and luminescent markings on their cheeks. But one stood slightly forward with curious boldness in her eyes. The other hung back, studying him with careful analysis. Ambassador Vishan appeared behind him and introduced his daughters. The bold one was Lyra. The thoughtful one was Kira. They were twins, rare among their people. They had never met a human before. Their father told them to return to their quarters and let the mechanic work. But they did not move. Their eyes stayed fixed on Danny, like he was the most interesting thing they had ever seen. Danny gave them a small nod and returned to his work. He did not have time for conversations, but he could feel their gaze on his back as he pulled tools from his kit and started disconnecting broken components. The work was hard. Velaran technology did not respond to force. Danny had to coax it, gentle and patient. Every time he thought he understood how something worked, it surprised him with unexpected complexity. Sweat dripped down his face. His hands grew sore, but he kept going. Hours passed. The twins came and went, watching from different spots around the engine room. Danny noticed that Lyra always moved closer while Kira kept her distance. They whispered to each other in their musical language. Danny did not understand the words, but he could guess what they were saying. They were wondering if this strange human could really save them. Danny wondered the same thing. By hour 6, He had managed to stabilize the power distribution network. The lights grew slightly brighter. The air felt less thin, but the main engine was still dead. Without it, they could not move. They would drift here until rescue came, or until their air ran out. Danny dug deeper into the engine core and found the central problem. A component called the Harmony Crystal had shattered completely. This crystal was the heart of the engine. It synchronized all the other systems and kept them working together. Without it, nothing else mattered. He asked the Velaran engineers if they had a spare. They said no. Such crystals were grown over many years. They could not be manufactured quickly. Danny asked if they could get one from another ship. They said the nearest Velaran vessel was 3 days away. By then, everyone on board would be dead. Danny sat back and stared at the broken pieces of crystal scattered across the floor. They sparkled like frozen tears. For the first time since arriving, he felt doubt creeping into his chest. He had promised to help these people, but some problems could not be solved with determination alone. Some problems needed resources that simply did not exist. Lyra stepped closer and asked if he was giving up. Her voice was challenging but also afraid. Danny looked up at her young face and saw the fear she was trying to hide. Behind her, Kira watched with quiet intensity. These 2 girls were counting on him. Their father was counting on him. The whole ship was counting on him. Danny stood up and brushed crystal dust from his knees. He told Lyra that he was not giving up. He just needed to think differently. If he could not find the part he needed, he would have to make it, somehow, with whatever materials he could find. Lyra's eyes widened. She asked if that was possible. Danny admitted he had no idea, but impossible had never stopped him before. Danny started pulling apart every non-essential system he could find. He stripped lighting panels from empty corridors. He took apart a broken food processor. He even dismantled a decorative fountain in the ambassador's quarters, apologizing as he worked. Ambassador Vashon watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. No Velaran would ever treat technology so roughly, but the human did not seem to care about elegance. He cared about results. The twins followed Danny through the ship like shadows. They had never seen anyone work like this. Velaran engineers were trained to be precise and careful. They followed established procedures. They never improvised. But this human attacked problems with creativity and stubbornness. When something did not work, he tried something else. When he lacked a proper tool, he used whatever was nearby. It was messy and chaotic and strangely wonderful to watch. Lyra was the first to offer help. She asked Danny what he needed, and he handed her a bundle of crystal fragments. He told her to sort them by color and size. She did not understand why, but she followed his instructions. The work kept her hands busy and her mind focused. It was better than standing around waiting to die. Kira approached more slowly. She was naturally cautious and needed time to observe before committing. But after watching Danny struggle with a Velaran technical manual, she stepped forward and offered to translate. The manual was written in complex scientific language that even the translation software could not handle properly. Kira read the passages aloud and explained them in simpler terms. Danny listened carefully and asked questions. Soon they developed a rhythm, passing information back and forth like old partners. Ambassador Vishen noticed this growing cooperation. He stood in the doorway of the engine room and watched his daughters working alongside the human. It troubled him at first. Velarans were taught that humans were aggressive and primitive. They conquered worlds and fought wars among themselves. They were dangerous. But this mechanic did not seem dangerous. He seemed kind and determined and oddly gentle despite his rough appearance. The ambassador approached Danny during a brief rest period and thanked him again for his efforts. Danny shrugged and said thanks were not necessary. He was just doing his job. The ambassador studied him for a moment and then asked why. Why risk his life for strangers? Why work so hard for people who were not his own kind? Danny thought about the question. He could have given a complicated answer about diplomacy or human values. But the truth was simpler. He told the ambassador that he had a younger sister back on Earth. Her name was Molly, and she was studying to be a teacher. Danny sent her money every month to help pay for her education. He had taken this frontier posting because it paid well, even though it meant being far from home. The ambassador asked what this had to do with helping Velorans. Danny smiled and said that Molly was always telling him to be kind to strangers. She believed that the universe became a better place when people helped each other, regardless of differences. Danny was not sure if she was right, but he liked to think she was. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect among his people. He said that Danny's sister sounded wise. Danny agreed. Back in the engine room, the real work continued. Danny had collected enough crystal fragments to attempt building a replacement harmony crystal. But the task seemed impossible. Real harmony crystals were grown in special facilities over many years. They had perfect internal structures that allowed energy to flow without resistance. Danny's collection was just broken pieces of different crystals, none of them designed to work together. But Danny had an idea. He had noticed that Veloran crystals responded to energy patterns. When he touched them while running a current through his repair tool, they vibrated differently. Maybe he could use this property to align the broken pieces. Maybe he could convince them to work together. He explained his theory to Kira. She listened carefully and then pulled up research files on her personal device. She found studies about crystal resonance and energy harmonics. The science supported Danny's idea, at least partially. No one had ever tried it this way before, but that did not mean it was impossible. Lyra grew excited. She suggested they use the ship's communication array to generate precise energy patterns. The array was still functional, and it could produce controlled frequencies. If they calibrated it correctly, they might be able to tune the crystal fragments into alignment. Danny looked at both twins with new appreciation. They were not just watching anymore. They were thinking and contributing. Together, the three of them developed a plan. The next 4 hours were intense. Danny worked on building a framework to hold the crystal fragments in place. Kira programmed the communication array to generate specific frequencies. Lyra monitored the energy readings and adjusted variables in real time. They made mistakes and corrected them. They argued about methods and found compromises. Slowly, something began to take shape. The improvised harmony crystal was ugly. It looked like a lump of mismatched glass held together with wire and hope. But when they activated the energy field, something remarkable happened. The fragments began to glow. The light was uneven at first, flickering and uncertain. But then it stabilized. The crystal hummed with power, rough but functional. Danny connected the improvised crystal to the engine core. Warning lights flashed. Error messages appeared on every screen. The Veloran engineers stepped back with alarm on their faces. But Danny kept working, adjusting connections and rerouting power flows. He had done this 100 times before with human technology. The principles were the same, even if the materials were different. The engine coughed and sputtered. Then it roared to life. Cheers erupted throughout the ship. Veloran crew members embraced each other with relief. The lights grew bright and steady. Fresh air flowed through the ventilation system. They were no longer dying. Ambassador Vashon rushed to the engine room and stared at the humming machinery with disbelief. He asked Danny how he had done it. Danny admitted he was not entirely sure. He had just kept trying until something worked. Kira stepped forward and corrected him. She said Danny had not just tried randomly. He had observed analyzed, adapted, and innovated. He had turned disaster into opportunity and weakness into strength. It was the most impressive thing she had ever witnessed. Lyra nodded in agreement. She added that Danny had also done something else remarkable. He had trusted them. He had treated them as partners instead of passengers. No adult had ever done that before. Danny felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. He was not used to praise. He changed the subject by asking about their heading. How long until they reached the peace negotiations? The ambassador's expression darkened. He checked the navigation systems and announced that they were still 6 hours from their destination. The negotiations might already be starting without them. And there was another problem. During their drift, they had moved into territory that was disputed between the Velaran Confederation and the Korath Empire. As if in answer, an alarm suddenly blared through the ship. A new contact appeared on sensors. It was a Korath warship, and it was heading directly toward them. Danny looked at the twins. Their faces had gone pale with fear. Whatever celebration they had felt moments ago was gone. The engine was fixed, but their troubles were just beginning.